Tack professor Svein Stølen, og gratulerer så mye med din utnevnelse som rektor tidligere i år. På vegne av alle deltakerne ønsker jeg også å takke Instituttet for statsvitenskap ved Universitetet i Oslo og organisasjonsutvalget bestående av professor Oddbjørn Knudsen, Ida Weset Bjøro og Hanna Iklebæk Christensen, samt deres assistenter for å invitere oss og ønske oss velkommen i Oslo til denne 11. generalkonferansen i ICPR. Vi vet alle hvor mye arbeid det er i å organisere en så stor konferanse, og vi er oppriktig glade og takknemlige for deres gjestfrihet. Well, you may have gathered that I was trying to thank the local organizers in their own language, but in order not to violate the great Norwegian language any further, I quickly switch back to English to welcome you all to the 11th ECPR General Conference in Oslo. Perhaps I should say welcome back to Oslo, because this is the second ECPR event here after the ECPR joint sessions in 1996. We are all extremely grateful to our colleagues at Oslo University to be so hospitable and even organize the final stage of the national election for our entertainment at this moment. I also thank the ECPR Central Services and the academic organizers, Klaus Gutz and Maurizio Carbone, for organizing and putting the program together. We have here altogether 2,045 registered participants, most of whom will present a paper at one of the 476 panels in 72 sections. But this year's General Conference also provides plenty of opportunities for you to meet your colleagues and friends, to further and enlarge your networks, and to discuss new developments in European political science. The program offers an exciting mix of today's plenary lecture by Professor Johan Olsen, founding father of neo-institutionalism. It's great to have him speak to us this afternoon. And we have 4 roundtables, 6 featured panels, not even mentioning the book exhibit and all the meetings of ECPR's more than 50 standing groups and research networks in between. As you know, ECPR has a number of prizes and awards to recognize outstanding contributions to European political science. This Aula has witnessed many award ceremonies, including that of the Nobel Peace Prize in the past. And it's a wonderful venue to present some of our own prizes. But given the time constraints, I hope you will also take the time to visit the ECPR website to read more about the backgrounds of the recipients, the composition of the juries, the jury reports, and previous winners. I will just briefly summarize these reports. So let me start with the biennial ECPR Lifetime Achievement Award. The jury decided to award the 2017 prize to Professor Joni Lovenduski of Birkbeck University of London for her key role in defining and developing the field of gender and politics. Spanning more than 30 years, her pioneering research on the political representation of women, the selection of female candidates for elected office, and the role of women in political parties has contributed new empirical data and advanced new conceptual frameworks challenging the gender-blind assumptions of contemporary political science. She is a source of inspiration and support to many young female scholars, and her work has reached beyond academe, influencing, for example, recruitment strategies of political parties. Unfortunately, Professor Lovenduski is unable to come to Oslo, but on her behalf, Professor Isabelle Engeli will accept the 2017 ECPR Lifetime Achievement Award. Oh, you have to come back. Okay. Next, the Matthijs Dogan Foundation's Prize in European Political Sociology is awarded by the ECPR for a major contribution to the advancement of political sociology. And the jury for the 2017 Matthijs Dogan Foundation Prize decided to award it to Professor Hans-Peter Krisi, who holds the Stein-Rokkan Chair at the European University Institute. Professor Krisi helped redefine and relaunch the field of political sociology. His research ranges across social movements, corporatism, direct democracy, elections, populism, and the political consequences of economic crises. His study of a dramatically evolving European society has energized a number of research areas with contributions on the challenges that face European society today, such as immigration, Euroscepticism, and globalization. This prize recognizes his prolific and much-cited academic output, the quality of his contributions over several decades, his leadership, and collaborative engagement with both senior and junior colleagues. Professor Krisi.
It's a great honor to receive this prize, and I would like to thank the jury for the recognition of my work. I would like to thank also those who, without me being aware of it, have proposed my name and have supported my name for this prize. And I would also like to thank all the students and colleagues who have collaborated with me in all the projects that I have launched over my career and without whom my work would not have been possible. And let me just add that I'm not supposed to talk too long. Let me just add that I think it is quite fitting that I may receive this prize in Oslo, because I've always tried in the large footsteps of Stein-Rokkan to connect the social structure to the dynamics of politics, political mobilization, political conflict, and political communication. So by honoring me, you also honor the Rokkanian tradition. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Hans-Peter. This year, ECPR is also offering a newly established award, the Hadley Bull Prize in International Relations, presented on an annual basis for the best book in international relations published in the past year. Out of 16 nominated books, the jury awarded the 2017 Hadley Bull Prize to Vincent Pouliot of McGill University for his book entitled International Pecking Orders, the Politics and Practice of Multilateral Diplomacy, published by Cambridge University Press. Using an approach that builds on social theories, Pouliot's book reveals the hierarchical structuring and social practices that pervade multilateral diplomacy. In his empirical analysis of the politics of diplomacy in NATO and the UN, he shows that the international pecking orders are complex social forms that the anarchy principle may not fully capture. His work opens up a new research agenda for the scholarly community. Unfortunately, Professor Pouliot cannot be with us today, but we offer him our congratulations on a well-deserved achievement, and we will send him his certificate by post. Finally, the 2016 EPS Prize for the best article appearing in the previous year's volume of the ECPR's professional journal, European Political Science, EPS. And the prize is given to an article that makes a substantial contribution to the field of political science, especially articles that contribute to the understanding of new and innovative trends or to innovative approaches to teaching and learning in the profession. The jury decided that this year's EPS prize should go to the paper Studying a New Phase of Europeanization of National Parliaments by Katjana Gatterman, Anna-Kena Heugenauer, and Ariella Hoef. In their paper, they highlight a new phase of Europeanization in which parliaments are increasingly mainstreaming EU affairs, blurring the traditional distinction between national and European policies. Their careful reasoning and remarkable summary of recent research, combined with prospects for a future research agenda, made this paper stand out. Ariella, I understand, is not here, but I invite Katjana and Anna-Kena to come forward. Okay, so now I quickly hand back to Professor Oddbjørn Knudsen, who will introduce our distinguished lecturer for this evening.
Director Svein Stølen, Plenary Speaker Johan Tolson, Chair Rudi Andeveg and the Executive Committee of ECPR, Director Martin Bull and the ECPR staff. Dear all, my name is Oddbjørn Knudsen. I'm chairing the local organizing committee for this conference, and I will first, on behalf of the Department of Political Science and the local organizing committee, welcome you to Oslo and to this conference. We hope you will enjoy the conference and enjoy Oslo. And we are sorry for the weather. We ask for sunny weather and 20 degrees, which is realistic even in the early September, but our wishes were obviously not prioritized. The local organizing committee comprises 3 persons. The 2 other persons are head of office at our department, Ida Bjørud, and Higher Executive Officer Hanne Iglebæk Christensen. They have done an enormous amount of work in organizing this conference, and they have done this in a very competent and, in my view, impressive way. They scored very high in organizing practical skills, I'll tell you. You have already given them warm applause, but I think you should do that once again. Then I will introduce the plenary speaker. Johan Tolson is Professor Emeritus in Political Science. He has been Professor in Public Administration and Organization Theory at the University of Bergen from 1973 to 1993. From 1993 to 2007, he was Director at ARENA, Center for European Studies at the University of Oslo. He has been a visiting scholar at the University of California in Irvine, and he has several times been visiting professor and scholar at Stanford University, also in California. He has published articles in many high-ranked international journals. Among his books are Europe in Search of Political Order, Governing Through Institutional Building, Institutional Theory and Recent European Experiments in Political Organization, and Democratic Accountability, Political Order and Change. These mentioned books were published between 2007 and 2017, the last one then this year. He has also written influential and important works in cooperation with James March, like the books ambiguity and change in organizations, rediscovering institutions, the organizational basis of politics, and democratic governance. His lecture today, as you already can see, is titled Democratic Accountability and the Changing European Political Order.
Thank you. For one who comes from a part of the world where the highest compliment you can ever get is, "That was not too bad." I'm not that trained to receive all this honor. It's appreciated, even if it's not deserved. Thank you. Observing children play, one cannot avoid noticing how much time they spend discussing what is the game all about, who is and should be allowed to play, what are the rules and what should they be, what is fair play and what accounts as rule breaking, what are and should be the consequences of breaking rules and who can sanction rule breakers, who is and should be allowed to create, interpret and change rules, how and why. For more than 2,000 years, European students of politics have struggled with similar issues. They have explored why humans constitute political communities, what forms of collective life are desirable and achievable, how communities organize and govern themselves, how the quality of life depends on legitimate order and change, and how political organization contribute to civilized coexistence among individuals with different values, interests, understandings, and resources. Moreover, Solon observed that hostility can be reduced by giving people power to elect officers of government and demand account from them at the end of their tenure. Today, students of politics also talk about the rules of the game and playing by the rules. And in societies committed to democratic rule, the credo is that the will of the people shall ultimately prevail. The people are the constituent power. The political order shall reflect how citizens want to organize and govern their life in common. The informed, voluntary, popular consent to foundational rules for living together is crucial. The distribution, exercise, and change of power must be explained and justified through reasoned argument and public contestation. And representation and accountability are fundamental for securing legitimacy, the right to govern society and command loyalty. The rule must not be subject to rulers beyond their control. Actors are accountable for what they do and what they could have done. No one is accountable for things they do not control. Most contemporary thinking about democratic governance emphasizes accountability as a normative principle and a mechanism for securing citizens' influence. Accountability processes are supposed to detect, assess, and sanction deviances from authorized mandates. But they are also first-order political processes offering an opportunity to contest the truth, moral, and power basis of existing orders and develop new ones. Citizens' perception of accountability regimes depend on substantive performance, procedural fairness, and institutional arrangement for explaining, justifying, assessing, and sanctioning behavior. And an effective accountability regime depends on three types of processes, I will argue. First, the routines of partly autonomous watchdog institutions with a legal, financial, managerial, or expert mandate. Second, accountability politics within a constituted political order. And third, accountability politics as part of reconstituting an order. Its normative and organizational principles, the basic rules for living together. My focus is on the role of ordering, challenging accountability politics in the European context. In settled democracies in normal times, it's common to take the existing order for granted, rather than relentlessly considering alternative orders. Demands for explanations and justifications are more likely in unsettled polities and at critical junctures. Crises trigger rethinking the political order, its ordering effects and dynamics of change. People question what kind of community they want to live in, and accountability processes become part of the contestation over the proper rule of different institutions and actors. Why then the recent upsurge of order challenging accountability demands? And what can it tell us about European developments, democratic accountability, the role of politics in society, and thus about political science? Accountability demands can be a sign of a well-functioning democracy. But they can also be the opposite. The upsurge suggests that things are not working well. There is discontent with the order, and not solely with a single institution or decision maker or issue. Are accountability demands then triggered of perceived deviances from an agreed upon order? Or are they part of a struggle over what constitutes a rightful order? What political institutions, associations, and individuals are a well-functioning democracy require, and the role of democratic politics in securing appropriate solutions? Contemporary theoretical discussions of accountability are embedded primarily in principal-agent conceptions of government. And I hold that European developments invite re-examination of key assumptions. I argue that European dynamics offer an opportunity to revisit foundational issues regarding the relations between political organization and civilized coexistence, issues that are difficult to observe in settled context. Mainstream principal agency conceptions of accountability are embedded in actor-centered views, models addressing related concerns and sharing some assumptions, rather than a single encompassing theory. Consistent with Dahl and Lindblom's claim that the first problem of politics is how citizens can prevent rulers from becoming tyrants, principal agent approaches conceive accountabilities as monitoring and controlling agents, achieving compliance and implementing the principal's preferences. The challenge is to establish causal understanding and assign blame and credit, punish non-authorized behavior and reward compliance, learn from successes and failures, and protect and improve the existing order. The role ascribed to rational calculation and social control is based upon assumptions about a predetermined authority structure with dyadic principal-agent relations, identifying who are principals and who are agents and what they can do. The ways in which power and accountability are allocated are treated as exogenous to the processes studied. Politics primarily involves who makes decisions and whose interests are served. Agents act on behalf of and are accountable to a principal. Principals and agents make decisions that affect each other, and they are associated through non-cooperative games. They have predetermined endowments and conflicting preferences. Principals define success criteria and control incentives for inducing desired behavior. Agents have superior expertise and information, are opportunistic, and cannot be trusted. Human nature is universal and inflexible. All actors are means-end rational, self-interested, and incentive-driven, calculating the expected utility of available alternatives. Relevant actors are mobilized across the processes studied. Change in order takes place through deliberate choices by the principal or through bargains. Consistent with the belief that representative democracy is the best form of popular self-governance, agents are assumed to be accountable to the people through electoral mechanisms, legislative scrutiny, and political administrative hierarchy. The will of the people is formed and expressed through competitive elections. Authoritative decisions are made by the legislators. Decisions are prepared, implemented, and enforced by the executive and public administration. Empirical studies, however, show that neither principals or agents always fulfill the roles assumed. And there is a need to make mainstream thought a little bit more compatible with behavioral studies of political administrative organizations. I hold that mainstream approaches exaggerate the importance of human rationality and control and underestimate the importance of confusions, complexities, and dynamics of modern democracies. I argue that current European accountability processes part of the development of a new political order, and that it is fruitful to explore the dynamics of order challenging accountability. Thus, I will offer an institutional approach that enlarges the perspective on accountability by treating more aspects of political organization, association, and agency as endogenous to accountability processes. Accountability regimes are part of an institutional arrangement for preserving order and continuity and creating dynamics and change. Accountability processes take place within settled and unsettled orders, and they affect and are affected by existing orders. Then, to order challenging accountability demands. Accountability requires identifiable decision makers. It is, however, difficult for democracies to formulate clear, consistent, and stable authority relations and normative standards to which actors can be held to account. Uncertainty, ambiguity, and limited control are intrinsic to political life. Accountability processes involve blame games as well as rational arguing and deliberation related to what has been done, what could have been done, whether what was done is acceptable, and also developing criteria for assessing behavior, explanations, and justifications. The likelihood of accountability demands depends on the institutional, social, and behavioral basis of political order, all endogenous to democratic politics. First, organization and the institutional basis of order. Authority and power arrangements make it more or less clear who the rightful principals and agents are. And modern democracies are compound politics with a precarious combination of normative and organizational principles. Elections, majority government, and hierarchy are not the only sources of legitimacy. Citizens authorize several institutions to act on their behalf. There is varying trust in majority rule, hierarchical command, legal rules, corporatist bargaining, market and price systems, expertise, traditions, social movements, civil society, and referendums. Second, association and the social basis of order refers to who constitute the people that is supposed to govern itself and in whose name authorities act. Their ways of living together, morals, trust, and cohesion. What ties individuals together and keeps them apart? And how deeply divided is society? What are the duties and rights of individuals in relation to the community, and those of the community in relation to individuals? And how are resources distributed? Third, agency and the behavioral basis, or basis of order. Conceptions of accountability depend on ideas about who governs and how they use and should use their power. An institutional approach holds that human nature is complex and dynamic, and that rational egoism is only one mindset among several, with variable legitimacy. Actors are goal-seeking, incentive-driven, following a logic of consequentiality, and calculate utility for different units. And they are also rule-driven, following by an internalized logic of appropriateness derived from identities related to various collectives. Actors counteract and exploit existing divisions, they build community, or they foster polarization. Calling rulers to account and sanctioning them requires resources, and it's important to recognize the limitations of citizens' power. We cannot expect continuous attention to political order. In liberal democracies, politics is a sideshow in the great circus of life, according to Dahl. And democracy needs to enable citizens to hold rulers accountable without their continuous participation. Accountability attracts public attention and involves mass mobilization, or they go on largely unnoticed by the public. Citizens may be passive, frustrated, and alienated. Still, under some conditions, they take on the hat of Socrates. They ask rulers and fellow citizens to give an account of what they do and why they are doing it. So whereas politics often is a synonym of choice, accountability processes involve both decision-making and sense-making. Democracies are arrangements for developing and transmitting democratic beliefs and identities, and citizens try to create order in their lives, including interpretations of what is politically necessary, possible, and desirable. Critical reason, inquiry, legitimate opposition, freedom of expression and associations are part of a European tradition. And democracy is a gamble on the possibility that people will learn how to act rightly, based on experience and reason. Intelligence and improvements are, however, not guaranteed. Constitutive choice is limited and shaped by what models are familiar. Orders develop over time as an artifact of an ecology of adaptation mechanisms, such as rational choice, experiential learning, imitation, diffusion, and competitive selections. All of these processes are imperfect. How then can we expect political order to affect accountability processes? An institutional approach suggests that political associations with different mixes of unity, diversity, trust, mistrust, and historic experiences generate different potentials for accountability demands. Social controversies may overwhelm political institutions' capacity for handling divisions, creating indecisiveness and gridlock. Shared culture may make an extensive political agenda possible, or make citizens deal with most situations without governmental interference. Institutional routines, ordering ideas and resources make a polity more or less able to cope with divisions and generate mutually acceptable solutions, thereby also affecting the felt need for calling rulers to account. Political agency and shifting public attention influence which accountability options are actually used. High degrees of satisfaction and trust are likely to foster popular passivity. The ruled are unlikely to call rulers to account if power holders routinely anticipate what citizens will see as legitimate, exercise self-restraints, and report to the satisfaction of citizens. Performance crises generate a search for new alternatives, and disappointments and scandals foster accountability demands. So consider three styles of regimes: accountability routines, accountability politics within an order, and order challenging accountability politics. Accountability routines imply settled institutions and full-time professionals operating within hierarchical and specialized structures. There are identifiable actors and clear, consistent, and transparent lines of authority and mandates. Actors do what they are supposed to do. They are programmed through a repertoire of offices, standard operating procedures, and resources. Right answers are discovered by competent, independent, and impartial watchdog institutions, settling disputes according to knowledge about means-end relations or rules. The task is to guard the existing order and discipline unruly agents. Most of the time, there is little felt need for public argumentation and contestation. Accountability processes can, however, be both order-maintaining and order-challenging. They can involve politics within an order and attempts to challenge that order. So accountability politics within an order assumes a less settled polity. There is normal politics, public debate, partisan contestation, but attention is usually on single events, actors, and institutions. The more interdependence, the more problematic it is to identify the contribution of specific actors and what they can legitimately be held accountable for. Institutional differentiation and partly autonomous power centers, rather than one single dominant center, makes it difficult to objectively attribute responsibility, opening up for blame games. The outcome of accountability processes depends on post-event processes that may involve search for truth and learning, or public drama embarrassing decision makers. Finally, accountability politics challenging an order. That's most likely in unsettled polities, in periods of turbulence and unprecedented situations. There are rival claims to truth, virtue, and power, competing interpretations of what accountability means and implies, and who should be held to account. Accountability politics is part of the mechanism through which communities develop, accept, apply, and change principles for the allocation, use, and control of power. All three regimes are important in democracies, but routine accountability rarely attracts attention from political science. Principal agent approaches are most likely to give insight into accountability politics within fairly settled polities. Yet the historical spatial context of Europe makes it important to explore order challenging accountability. Conceptions of democratic accountability have developed in the context of the sovereign nation state, but the dominant role of the state has been attacked from both right and left and challenged by European integration and globalization. A new political order is developing, but there is disagreement over what kind of order, how it will happen, and with what effects, and over the desirability of change. There is a need to rethink democratic accountability beyond the state. In the European Union, the most complex polity in the world, according to Schmitter, order challenging accountability demands reflect public discontent. However, in international comparisons, European states are fairly well functioning. It's commonplace to see the EU as a successful case of integration, and the Union has fairly well developed accountability institutions. What then, according to the critics, is wrong, and who should be called to account? Unemployment and poverty make many people disillusioned and angry. The world is confusing, threatening, and uncontrollable, and there are concerns about democratic legitimacy. Order challenging accountability demands reflect a breakdown of the EU's "we are all winners" narrative, and there is democratic backsliding in parts of East and Central Europe. According to critics, authorities have not effectively addressed the anger and fears of disillusioned citizens who have not benefited from European integration and global trade. They have neither adapted to public opinion nor convinced the public. Protesters are brushed aside by an overuse of terms such as populist, anti-European, fascist, and xenophobes. European authorities admit a need to restore legitimacy and trust, yet the Union is a dynamic order with strong elements of power sharing, contested normative standards, and cultural understandings. It is unclear what kind of order actors are accountable to, and whether anyone is in control and can legitimately be called to account for the existing order. Accountability demands are contingent upon competing views of the European Union. Thus, what order are actors accountable to? The Lisbon Treaty declared that the EU should be founded on representative democracy. But according to critics, parliamentary accountability is weak and European citizenship is a vague concept. In European parliamentary elections, it's difficult for citizens to assign responsibility, call rulers to account, attribute praise and blame, and punish and reward actors at the ballot box. Criticism of the polity becomes necessary because the EU fails to integrate routine opposition to policies and rulers and provide an outlet of criticism for the order itself. Rather than a dyadic principal-agent relations, there are dense, evolving webs of accountability arrangement and contradictory normative standards. There is no unifying narrative explaining and justifying the existing order, nor a shared vision of how accountability should be organized and legitimized. To be effective, accountability requires cooperation among vertical and horizontal forums, audit institutions, inspectors, scrutiny committees, courts, ombudsmen, investigations, transnational forms of parliamentary oversight, and mass media. It is uncertain how important democratic concerns are compared to other normative standards, and democracy as a legitimating standards give limited guidance for how to organize the Union. Democracy does not prescribe precise territorial borders, who qualifies as a citizen, and who shall legitimately decide who is to be included. It is of limited help to appeal to the principle that the people shall decide when there is conflict over whether the demos shall be founded on territoriality, history, nationality, ethnicity, commitment to specific political principles, or being subject or affected by government. Who is then accountable for the existing order? It's less than clear what role deliberate decisions have in European order developments. Official EU documents reflect a belief in human reason and choice. The Commission's white paper on the future of Europe assumes that form follows function. Still, all organizations have their birthmarks. They are marked by the time of history they arrive and the ideas and the resources then available. And the EU's legitimacy at the time of its founding was not based on democratic representation and accountability. The context was the collapse of the Weimar Republic, the rise of authoritarian regimes, and World War II, discrediting the nation-state, parliamentary supremacy, referendums, nationalism, and ordinary people. Deliberate order building is problematic because no single authority is in control. Political feasible alternatives tend to be ineffective, whereas radical change lacks political feasibility. Change processes have been contested and ad hoc, for example, as new members have joined the Union. The European political order is said to reflect a messy, contingent, and haphazard series of political struggles and cannot be reduced to an instrument for political will, moral right, or an overall vision. Institutional relations have been shaped in polycentric open processes, interaction between actors whose roles and functions were not predefined by an overarching concept of legitimate political order. Since the 2004 draft treaty establishment of a constitution for Europe was rejected in the referenda, one cannot realistically expect more grand design and constitutional Big Bang at the EU level, quoting Bowen's Curtin and Tehart. This brings up order challenging accountability politics. For theory builders, the persistent pursuit of accountability in spite of the difficulties of validly establishing causal responsibility and assigning credit and blame represents a challenge. For political actors, uncertainty creates a space for blame games, a set of opportunities. In an unsettled polity, it's unsurprising to observe vivid order-challenging accountability politics and not solely accountability routines and accountability politics within an established order. The tension between levels of governance, European central building and membership autonomy, is well known. Some want a closer union. EU is necessary to cope with the problems the continent face. They point to a mismatch between expectations and the capabilities. They argue for strengthening the union's institutions and own resources. Problems are facing the EU are attributed to national political systems, and the union needs to hold member states accountable for delivery of commitments. Other claims that integration has gone too far. It's constraining national self-governance and accountability of domestic voters and parliaments. The power should be returned to member states. In the Brexit referendum, Leave voters emphasized national sovereignty, cultural identity and anxiety, border control, migration and jobs. Prime Minister Theresa May activated visions of the sovereign parliament and democratically accountable government. Order challenging accountability demands also include criticism of the interinstitutional power balance, the relation between the people and democratically elected representatives and markets, courts, expert agencies and executives. A criticism is that constitutionalized economic rights and multiple veto points demanding broad political agreement constrained the democratic capacity to deal with problems of global capitalism and inequality. The domain of the market has increased and market actors are empowered. The domain of democratic politics has decreased and political decision makers are constrained. The court has usurped power and given priority to market competition and economic freedoms. Parliamentary rule is constrained by court activism. Political judicial power relations must be rebalanced in order to avoid rule by lawyers rather than by law. Accountability will also rely on empowered watchdog agencies at arm's length from politics and direct electoral control. And critics argue that strengthening non-majoritarian institutions and non-elected actors hides or diverts attention from their normative and power basis, reduces accountability to citizens with possible troubling implications for democratic legitimacy and accountability. Finally, the debt crisis and efforts to save the euro, bail out banks and reassure capital markets have created executive dominance. A new economic regime has caused accountability deficit, limiting the role of parliaments and harming democratic legitimacy. Democracy has been marginalized by a rhetoric of emergency, existential threats, and economic necessities, even when the issues had deep distributional conflicts. However, the desire to strengthen democratic politics and accountability is not universal. There are competing views as to whether a democratic deficit exists and whether the Union is and should be a democratic project. Struggle about the proper relations between citizens, elected representatives, markets, courts, experts, and executives in an important part of a historical liberal discourse. Market liberals favors order where citizens solve problems in self-regulating markets and civil society without political interventions. Independent courts are welcomed as part of a conception of democracy superior to majority government. Functional expertise is seen as a cornerstone or legitimate institutional architecture with capacity to act quickly and effectively, and executive leadership is traditionally given priority during crisis. Order challenging accountability demands have been part of efforts to find viable answers to the questions of who and what shall constitute Europe. A struggle over what is a rightful order and how to develop legitimate institutions for governing, more than policing an agreed upon order. Still, this development has not implied one order replacing another, based upon completely different normative and organizational principles. It has involved a rebalancing of basically legitimate principles, and the Union can develop in different directions. Some prescribe a new deal, rebalancing market freedoms and social security, and counteracting social inequality within and between member states. Others prescribe a new narrative. Old explanations and justifications are unconvincing. Needed is a European vision expressing a shared identity, making the division of powers and responsibilities easier to understand, and explaining to citizens what the EU does for them. EU developments raise questions about the possibilities and limitations of influencing political order and change through democratic accountability demands. Processes that involve two challenges. First, how to effectively hold power holders accountable, and second, and less attended to, how to avoid holding power holders accountable for things they do not control, thereby reducing levels of trust and legitimacy. The development raised questions about how we understand democratic order politics, questions that are of particular importance in an area when the hegemonic Western rhetoric about liberalism and secularism has to be explained and justified because, and I quote, the majority of the world's population is patently unconvinced by either, quoting Dreisig, Honig, and Phillips. Europe is in a transition, and it is commonplace to see European integration as sui generis. However, the dynamics resemble earlier efforts of state building, nation building, and individual character building, and there are reasons for not exaggerating the uniqueness. Rather to link it to theoretical ideas about democratic accountability and politics, and inviting the discourse of political science back to its roots. Instead of asking for a new science of politics for a new society, à la Tocqueville, I hold that our understanding is facilitated by awareness of the disciplined historic conversation concerning some unresolvable tensions and balancing acts related to the search for unity, civilized governance, and coexistence. An institutional approach goes back to the ancient idea that the task of political science is to discuss the absolute best political order and also what is achievable in specific contexts. This aspiration is broadly consistent with demands that political science develops a more political theory, focusing on institutional issues, once privileged as the main agenda of normative politics, citing Waldron. Furthermore, not to start out with, and I quote, the lofty ideals of classical democratic theory, assuming rational decision-making and fully informed citizens, but study how people actually act and make decisions. Dalton and Klingemann. A premise for my argument is that democracies live with unresolved conflicts, and that order challenging accountability processes are linked to these unresolvable tensions and a balancing act, some of them built into the language of politics. Key terms are dynamic and contested, not fixed and agreed upon. Conceptions and boundaries of the political change over time. Politics is viewed as a depraved activity linked to reason of the state and pursuing dominance by all available means, and also as a noble art of government based on reason and justice. Without denying the importance of power struggle among contending interests, strategic behavior, non-cooperative games, and distributive battles, there are also other strands of political thinking. Democratic politics is ideally a way to rule divided societies without undue violence. It is search for informed voluntary consent of the people through reflection and reasoned deliberation. There is search for and constructions and affirmation of legitimate institutions, associations, and actors. Yet democracy may fail to build consent due to inadequate political institutions' capabilities, antagonism in society, or actors that are not motivated or capable of building and maintaining unity. The democratic vision assumes willingness and capability to build and maintain shared purpose, solidarity, allegiance to an order, in spite of the many forces toward division. Politics is eternally concerned with the development of unity from diversity, Wheeler writes. The quintessence of democratic politics is a construction and reconstruction of our lives together, make it ordered and civilized coexistence possible, Wildavsky. A dilemma is how to reconcile competition and cooperation, create common rules amid diversity, secure collective action and remain a community while maintaining individual freedom in the absence of objectively discernible common good that the people can know. Democracies balance ideas about an omnipotent people and also widespread distrust in the people. Citizens are seen as having the capacity for rational reasoning, but also as being badly informed, disengaged, gullible, and driven by emotions. The people is the only legitimate fountain of power, yet it should have a limited role due to the danger of disturbing the public tranquility by interesting too strongly the public passions, from the Federal Papers. In the words of Schumpeter, which political scientists often quote, the typical citizen dropped down to a lower level of mental performance as soon as he entered the political field. He becomes primitive again. Political truth, norms, and powers formed through free discussion and partisan controversy are tentative and contested, and there are competing conceptions of what is and ought to be subjects of democratic control. Belief in government's ability to maintain order and secure progress varies over time and across polities. And lawmaking as a tool of majority rule competes with law as an expression of truth and justice. Democracies give strong normative support to clear goals, rules, lines of authority and accountability. A cult of efficiency stresses neutral means and neglected ends, but foundational tensions are rarely resolved and fully resolved and embedded in the constitutions. There are tensions between centralization of power in a sovereign center and protecting the autonomy of institutions and securing checks and balances. Hobbes emphasized the need for centralizing power, Montesquieu the need to balance powers. Yet efforts to integrate into a political order compete with efforts to defend autonomy of the component units. All polities face the questions of what forms of integration their components can tolerate and what forms of diversity the order can tolerate. And winning public office does not guarantee actual capability to command and control at will. The number of votes and public authority do not dwarf all other resources. Democratic government competes with power centers based on economic, religious, military, organizational, technological, and professional resources. Balancing the need for expert judgment and independence with democratic control is a perennial question. To get things done, democracies require a public administration staffed by professionals governed by an ethos of office. However, usurpation of power by bureaucrats is an ever-present hazard. Furthermore, demands placed on officials are frequently beyond the capabilities of their offices. Polity and society are partly interdependent and partly autonomous spheres of thought and action, and the proper polity-society balance is contested. Democracies struggle with how to best protect the private realm from political intervention and the public realm from the private one. There is no uncontested account of the relative powers of politics vis-à-vis family, churches, trade unions, business associations, or individuals. In addition, democracy depends on the quality of the citizens and how they associate. And the European lack of a demos debate activates the old issue of what a population is supposed to govern itself needs to share in order to make informed voluntary consent possible. According to Durkheim, a society cannot hold together unless there exists among the members a certain intellectual and moral community. John Stuart Mill held that the free institutions are next to impossible in a country made up of different nationalities. Nevertheless, historically, a people has been formed through coercion and chance, and state building has taken place without shared ethnicity, language, religion, and customs. Democratic hopes are linked to a vision of humans as malleable and a mindset of reasoned political judgment, capable of identifying what is politically necessary, feasible, and desirable by balancing competing validly claims in the absence of objectively correct answers. Rousseau argued that the customs and manners written into the hearts of citizens are more important than formal laws, and an important task of the institutions is to secure the ethical, moral, and intellectual self-development of citizens, making them fit as rulers and ruled, while avoiding indoctrination and manipulation. In Europe, civilizing institutions have gone hand in hand with changes in human personality, manners, and self-discipline. Public codes of conduct and expectations have been internalized, reducing the use of private violence. Still, there is no agreed-upon theory of democratic education, and arguably, democracies need to rediscover education's democratic purposes. Democracies are always in the process of becoming. The terms of order change, declarations of the end of the ideology and of history notwithstanding. Polities emerge, develop, and wither. There is institutionalization and deinstitutionalization, integration and disintegration, center formation and decentration, democratization and de-democratization, professionalization and deprofessionalization. There are periods of stability and path dependency, but also path-breaking junctures. Purposeful attempts to design political order are central. It is a very central concern for any polity. Deliberate design is nevertheless often a minor part of an ecology of change process. Top-down design competes with bottom-up processes transforming popular experience into rules, rules into principles, principles into institutions, and institutions into political orders. Democracy normally have the capacity only for incremental reforms, and order challenging accountability demands define limits for what is an acceptable order. Compromises are organized around shifting mixes or red lines, working as independent constraints, defining what is politically possible and desirable, legally correct, economically rational, scientifically true, technically possible, administratively feasible, socially fair, and cultural and religious appropriate. Europe's Enlightenment heritage glorifies agency, rational reflection and action, human control and progress through experiential learning, and a basic premise of democratic accountability is that there is choice. Political life is not completely random or deterministic. Still, theories of accountability need to explore whether democratic visions overrate the scope of human rationality and control. There are situations governed by institutional routines and politics as usual. There are also ill-structured situations, difficult to understand, to predict, to assess and control. Situations that require actions without much time for analysis, deliberation, bargaining and coalition building. The possibility of mobilizing actors and issues facilitate spontaneity and chance events. And the challenge is to understand the possibilities and limitations of human choice and learning in context characterized by ambiguous normative standards, uncertain facts and causality, and limited control. Studies of garbage can processes explore such conditions. There are chance elements and unpredictable interaction between streams of problems, solutions, participants, and choice opportunities. Outcomes are unintended byproducts of interactive but uncoordinated acts and processes, suggesting a temporal understanding of events rather than an intentional and consequential one. In brief, Europe struggles with its own crises and balancing acts. Accountability processes are part of preventing unauthorized behavior and abuse of power, yet the upsurge of order challenging accountability demands shows that they are also part of forming and changing orders. Democratic rationality and control may not match Enlightenment standards, and there is a need for realism regarding what citizens and elected representatives can do in complex and dynamic contexts. There are, however, reasons for confidence rather than despair. Aristotle taught us that learning to live together may be a long process, for just as a state cannot be made out of any and every collection of people, so neither can it be made at any time at will. The search for unity amid unresolvable tensions are familiar from historical discourses on normative and organizational foundations of governance. While the discourse does not provide ultimate answers to understanding the role of accountability processes in democratic balancing acts, it does offer a promising framework for further conversations about democratic rules for living together. In an era of transformation, ambiguity, uncertainty, and limited control, it may be fruitful to listen to the conversations, and perhaps to children at play. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting and excellent speech, Johan. On behalf of ECPR, I shall give you a gift. And the gift is not a secret anymore. It's a voucher for tickets to the Opera House performances. And it also contains a card with greetings from Rudi Anderweg and Martin Böll. So I will give it to you. And what a coincidence. The next point on the agenda is also about the Opera House. We are now moving to the Opera House for the conference reception, and I hope to see as many as possible of you, all of you, there at 8 o'clock. And finally, I will, on behalf of all of those who have been speaking here, I want to thank you so much for your attention here in the Aula. And we hope to see you then at the Opera House. Thank you very much.